Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Molly Starback, Director of the Duke Office of Postdoctoral Services. And today we are very pleased to welcome our panelists for our discussion on careers in grant writing. I want to start by thanking our panelists for coming to Duke today. Thank you very much. We know how busy you are, so it's really great that you could take time out of your busy schedule. And this workshop is co-sponsored with the Graduate School Office for Graduate Student Affairs, Melissa Boston. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to briefly introduce our three panelists, and then we will lead off with questions. Many of you submitted questions in advance. Thank you for doing that, and then we'll open the floor for questions for everyone. So Eva Garland is the founder of, is it Eva or Eva?
Eva.
Eva, okay, is the founder of Eva Garland Consulting, which specializes in developing strategies to secure grant funding, preparing high-quality grant applications, and effectively managing grant awards. Dr. Garland holds a BA in chemistry from Columbia, a PhD in chemistry from Caltech, and was formerly a faculty member in chemistry at NC State. Sam Tetlow is the CEO of EpiCypher, Inc. He has successful experience as an investor and entrepreneur in companies including ILS Genomics, Gentris Corporation, and Transzyme Pharma. Mr. Tetlow holds an MBA from UNC Keenan-Flagler Business School. Oh, so you went to UNC too. Okay, cool. And a BS in aerospace engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And then finally, one of my favorite postdocs of all time, former postdocs, Nick Trotta, who completed his graduate and postdoctoral training at Vanderbilt University and right here at Duke University, respectively. A neurobiologist by training, Dr. Trotta is an independent consultant working with small and startup phase biotechnology companies to build grant funding, gather market knowledge, and advance strategic partnerships. So we'll start by, I just did a brief introduction, but I'll let you guys elaborate on that, and then we'll move to the questions. So, Dr. Garland, would you like to start?
Sure, yeah, thank you for the introduction. Give you a little bit of background beyond what's been said. I started out in academics, and I was on the faculty of NC State through 2006, I believe. And at the time, had the opportunity to leave NC State to start a spin-out that was based on some discoveries, some very interesting molecules that were discovered by another faculty member, and they were looking for somebody to move over and develop that and commercialize the product, and it seemed like a really neat opportunity. So I jumped at that opportunity and was involved in starting a company, Agile Sciences, on Centennial Campus. Was VP of R&D for that company, and I had a really interesting experience there, which I think sort of shaped the direction that I went into, which was we had 2007, we had a nice raise. That was a great year to be a startup. And then 2008 came along, and we were out of money. And there was really no way. And so, you know, I had a lab, I had scientists working for me, and the last thing I wanted to do is have to close down. And so really looked creatively at what are ways that you can take very early stage research and move it forward. And to me that was really interesting, is how to take something, get it out of academics, you know, so you're actually, you know, be able to move it into a product where you can commercialize it and you make a difference in society with that technology that's been developed. But you're so early stage that you're having, especially in 2008, having a hard time pitching your story to VCs. You're very early. And how to kind of move through that in a lot of different ways. One, sure, of course, is financially, and that's kind of a big thing, big area of what I've gone into now. But also in terms of how do you run a lab that's really lean. You don't have the resources of a Duke or an NC State. How do you do that as well? So I was able to kind of manage that over the next 6 years, largely with non-dilutive funding. I looked everywhere I could to try to bring in money so that I could keep the lab going. Ended up raising roughly $6 million over the next 4 or 5 years. They're now up to about $16 million in non-dilutive funding, was able. That was about 90% of the income that we had, and so really going after grants strategically. We can talk about that more, but you know, finding the right way to keep pushing your science forward, push it toward commercialization, but also benefit from, you know, the various opportunities that are available for non-dilutive funding. Started my own company about 2 years ago. Had so much fun doing it with Agile. I wanted to help with a bunch of other companies as well. Currently have about 5 people at my company, and we do 3 different areas. We do strategic planning. How do you fit non-dilutive funding within your overall business proposition, moving your product forward? We help to write grants, make sure that they get that money, and then grant management. So once you get the money, as you know, there's a lot of reporting requirements. So those are the 3 areas that we're involved in.
Right, yeah, thank you. Sam?
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for coming this morning. and Molly and Mark for hosting, and thank you so much for being here. So 1992, I'm in my car, getting ready to walk into my co-op job that I took for about 9 months when I was an undergrad, and I'm reading the Human Blueprint, and I'm about to walk into an engineering job where we're making basically boilers to make steam, to run through a steam generator to make electricity. And I'm reading this book and I'm looking at my front door and I'm saying, I want to do this, and I'm not really interested in making power generation equipment. And this was well before the human genome was uncoded, and I could just see this dynamic happening over the next 50 years. So of course, out of graduation, I took a job at GE selling power generation equipment. Did that for about 3 years, did GE's audit staff for another 3 years, and eventually made my way back to North Carolina, started my MBA, and really wanted to get into life sciences and really wanted to do venture capital. So got very lucky. The week before I started my MBA at Carolina, I started an internship at a local venture fund called Research Triangle Ventures. One of the early guys at SAS was the IT part of the partnership. They didn't have a life science person in the firm, so I raised my hand and said, I'd really like to do that. And started reading business plans, and 3 years later worked away basically full-time while I was going to school full-time, and doing my MBA, did the summer there, started full-time after graduation, and eventually made my way to a partner in that firm. And we saw a number of, we did 11 companies total, 4 life sciences. I think we had great managers in those life sciences companies, and 3 of them did very well. TransIme, as you guys probably know if you've been in the space for a little while, went public in April of 2011. We did actually okay, not great, on that deal. And one of them was not doing well at all. It was going sideways. And venture is this weird job where you're sitting on a board, and if you need to step into a CEO role, you're actually getting a demotion, right? It's one of these bizarre kind of places. And what I found is that I actually really loved being in the operating seat. I love being in a COO role or a CEO role, and actually being close to the action. You know, for me, venture had all of the career appeal and trajectory and a lot of fancy moniker and facade around it, but I was 1 degree away of separation from the actual value creation in an entity, in a company. And it took me about 3 years to actually figure out that that's really what gets me charged up. That was 3 companies ago. So I've done 2 companies prior to Epicipher, both in the SNP genotyping clinical genomics space, supporting drug development. One of those companies was a government contractor, so really got exposed to government contracts, government grants. And we successfully bought Beckman Coulter Genomics, ran that business for about a year or so. They're successfully on their way and continue to grow, and was looking for my next opportunity. So looked around the triangle, talked to about 50 different companies, tried to figure out that right space of where I could play and what to do. And Epicipher really was brought to me as, you probably don't want to do that company, and here's 3 others that you really should think about. And I kind of peeled back that onion, and I found 3 amazing scientific founders here at UNC, Stanford, and MD Anderson. And we're in the epigenetic space, so all of that dynamic regulation that's not genetically driven, we kind of call our space, specifically around histone modification and moving into RNA, probably staying away from DNA methylation for a number of reasons. And our business model is pretty simple. We make product, we sell it on the marketplace, and then we use non-dilutive funding to pay for R&D on new product development and most of our overhead. And I have to say, Eva has been tremendously helpful for us on grants compliance. Nick is I think, the best example of this kind of grant writing role. And we use Nick. I call him full-time because he contributes full-time. He's really only working for us about half of his time, but he's a rock star in every sense of the word. So our model is actually pretty simple on paper, and it requires a ton of work, a ton of effort. We have 9 people full-time. We have another 8 consultants. We've got 170 customers. Most of those are repeat buyers, which is kind of the way you want to build a business. And we're looking to double our revenue again this year from what we did last year. We did all that on 200 grand of friends and family equity dollars. And so the power of non-dilutive funding, is really in the proof of what we've done. And I think in the 2 companies Nick has most recently been involved with, another great example of that strategy being put to play. So, and I guess I'll just leave with, we are hiring now for part-time grant writers, and we'll talk later about why that is the best job in the world.
We like jobs. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
And yeah, I can confirm MBA's got some very cool science right now that we're writing grants on, and yeah, that's a great idea. I would love a little help. So I think Eva developed a strategic plan, and Sam is trying to meet all those numbers, and just a trickle down effect. Yeah. So anyway, so I'm Nick. As Molly said, I went to graduate school at Vanderbilt and postdoc here at Duke in neurobiology. And hit the crossroads that I'm sure a lot of you are hitting, of taking a look at the academic marketplace, realizing that an assistant professorship is probably not till I'm in my early 40s, if that, when I'm a 27-year-old postdoc. My first grant probably isn't for another 12 years, whatever it is. Just seeing that career path is extremely challenging. And so I jumped ship and was lucky to have a couple of friends at a company down in the park called Affinergy. And the company was very heavily invested in this non-dilutive funding strategy. So just to define some terms, when we talk about non-dilutive funding, what we mean is basically selling anything that's not stock in the company, right? That's dilutive funding. That's when other people buy chunks of the company. Non-dilutive funding is grants, is contracts, is partnerships that don't require you to sell stock, that don't require you to sell equity. And so a lot of the small companies that are out there now, Affinergy was a good example. The next company I worked with was a place called Advanced Liquid Logic. We just got acquired last year by Illumina. That company, probably it was acquired for about $100 million and raised about $60, $70, $80 million through stock raises, contracts, corporate partnerships, various means, but which looks like about a dollar for dollar return on the investment. However, since most of that money was non-dilutive, came from grants and other mechanisms, the value got passed to our shareholders without having to raise a whole lot of extra money. So just to drive home that point, a lot of the small startups that are out there now are very interested in that kind of fundraising method, of raising this non-dilutive funding. Not only do the core shareholders, our academic partners, our academic founders who spin their technologies out, they get to keep control of their company, they get to keep the value in their company, and when they do want to sell stock, that stock is much more valuable. So they want to start. Now, the other side of that is VC money, as Sam used to be in that world, is just gone, right? There's not much out there unless you have something really special. And really early stage companies like the ones that mostly that I work with that are 3 guys in a garage, don't have access to those kinds of funds. And so it's very difficult to get started that way. But getting started through the grant funding mechanisms is much more straightforward, borderline free. And really is based on your scientific ideas and the data that you have, as opposed to a really sophisticated business strategy. So those are the things that usually my clients that are just starting out, that are 2 or 3 employees, they can build those cases more readily. So as far as grant writing as a career, just to hit a couple quick bullets. So grant writing for me was a really important transition from bench scientist, 20 hours a day, decapitating mice, that kind of stuff, to now more of a business kind of position where I can do business development, I can do marketing, and do sales. And grant writing really helped me make that transition, because in the SBIR, the small business grants that we write, there's a product at the core of all of those grants. So it's not just building a scientific case that this works and it's the right method to improve XYZ clinical situation. It's actually building at least something of a tenable business case. And so it very much is wonderful training for that kind of, for moving into that kind of a career path.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for explaining what non-dilutive funding is.
No problem.
So, what's a typical day like for you? Do you sit around and answer emails? You write, obviously. Is this something that you have to go to the office every day, or you can work at home in your bunny slippers, or?
So I don't work from home very often because I have twins, so I try to get out of the house as much sooner as possible. So you know, there's a lot of cool workspaces around town. The American Underground is in Durham. There's a place called the Frontier down in RTP that's just free workspace that anybody can walk in, get a cup of coffee, free wireless. There's conference rooms there. Great place to get off site, just get out of your lab, get out of your house to work. So I exploit a lot of those kind of spaces. I'm actually renting a little office in the Frontier now. But typical day, I mean, I write in the morning and I read in the afternoon. I just like to write in the morning. So, usually, so the SBIR cycles, at least that we write a lot of, are 3 deadlines throughout the year. So the first month after a deadline is usually all business development, is meetings and talking to people and is this a good grant, is this a good idea, can I help, am I competent in this area to even do anything for you? And then the rest of the 2-3 months, whatever it is grinding on finishing those applications. So yeah, so a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of meetings, a lot of smiling at strangers.
You're good at that. Ava, how about you?
Well, I personally do a lot of the business development side, so I personally spend maybe 10–15% of my time now on actual grant writing. So maybe I'll talk more about the 2 people who do grant writing full time for me. They are given completely flexible hours. To me, it's a very fun career because you set your own hours, you work from where you want. We meet in person every couple weeks. Let's see, as Nick said, it's very cyclical, and so it is the type of career where it can get really crazy and then take, like one of my employees just took 3 weeks off, you know, because April 5th was a big deadline and he went to Poland for 3 weeks. So you can do that, you know, you're working really hard and then you take a break. I think the one thing, it's important to be able to meet deadlines. I think that's really critical. And so there's often kind of that push to get to a deadline. So if that's not you, it's probably not a good career because grants are due on a specific date. And then, you know, the other thing is just you are independent and alone a lot. I mean, even if you're within a community or people writing grants, you're still going to be spending a lot of your time digging into literature, writing, doing things where, you know, if you like to be alone and do that kind of thing, which I do, you know, that's a good thing. That probably suits you pretty well. I think the other thing that I would say that's really cool about grant writing that I had maybe recognized right away is just how much learning you get to do. I mean, you get to constantly learn new fields. And so even if it's a field that you might sort of peripherally be in, you know, neuroscience, whatever it might be, you're going to learn a completely new technology, a new way of thinking about the field. And to me, that's what's most exciting, to dig into literature and say, wow, you know, if this works, this idea works, I mean, this is going to be huge. It's going to save lives, and I'm contributing to this, you know, development of the idea, because that's what you do. Writing a grant is really developing an idea, and you know, in some small way, contributing to being able to move these very exciting technologies forward. So, to me, that's the exciting part. It is, it can be a lot of work, but I think it can also be very, very exciting work.
And just to echo that, maybe Eva's group is having more luck than my hiring managers have in the past, but typically, all the companies I've worked with had 1 or 2 dedicated grant writers on staff pretty much at all times. Usually 2, just in case one quits all of a sudden and we'd be left in the lurch, so it's always good to have 2. In my experience, 1 out of about 5 sticks for more than 1 grant cycle. And then maybe 1 out of 10 sticks for longer than like a year. Maybe you might be getting better people than I've, or more dedicated people or more interested people in grant writing than I've seen in some of the other places. But almost all those people, if they do decide to move on from grant writing, I've almost always seen them get other jobs and other career paths, whether it's medical writing or proposal development or going back to the bench. All those things are options. But I have seen, you know, maybe 1 out of 4, something like that, decide this is something that they really embrace, and maybe 3 out of 4 get some experience and then are ready to try something else. So it is a bit of a unicorn who wants to do this for 8–10 years, however long I've been doing it.
So. Yeah, just One thing I would say is I think the title grant writer, to me, doesn't inspire greatness. It is greatness, but I think that title maybe doesn't do it justice. And I think part of the reason why maybe people don't have a natural affinity to that title, or maybe even the role, is I think it's really, from a company perspective, it's really effective to put it into perspective. I mean, if you think about what we're doing is we're proposing a very innovative technology. It's got to be, as Eva was saying, really brand new and transformative, potential to be completely transformative. We're talking about things like next-gen sequencing, things like lab on a chip, stuff that is a little bit science fiction, and you actually have data to say that it can happen. And you have to put, I think, to write an effective grant or to get money, you have to put that into perspective of, here's why this transformative innovation is significant in the field. Here's why it's new. And that requires a head above the treetops and understanding where the field is going, why this can impact patient care in the next 5 to 15 years, and the roadmap to get that product from out of the lab and into the marketplace's hands that'll be willing to pay for it. And that whole gestalt of that analysis and the perspective of what you have to get done is actually a very strategic and very challenging thing to do. And I think that's really the role. And I think about the role, and I think of when Eva wrote our strategic plan, as Nick helps us execute it, leading the execution of it. I mean, you're really a company catalyst. And that's the job, as I see it. And I think that has a lot more appeal and maybe it's actually doing justice to the title of the role. And when people hear grant writer, I don't know that they understand that you have to fit that grant into the roadmap of the company. That's got to fit into the landscape of the industry. And you have to make that sound incredibly attractive, eminently doable, and incredibly transformative in 6 pages for a phase 1 and 24 in a phase 2 SBIR grant. And as Mark Twain said, I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long letter. And so I think it's the job. It's eminently flexible, as you've heard, and you're the only one that sees the landscape in between those paragraphs of the industry, the company, and you've got to be willing and able to do that heavy lifting in the body of the grant, interact with people inside the company, maybe an academic collaborator that could be all the way across the country. So I think it is being excellent at writing, but I think you have to have a strategic headset to do it great. You have to have a strategic headset. You have to be able to be able to go down in the weeds and come back up to the strategy level on a very nimble basis, and do that in an environment where you may not know if you're any good at this for a year and a half, because that's just the timetable, and that requires willpower and belief. It's almost, you almost have to believe in something you can't see.
Excellent. Good. And you just touched on a lot of character traits that you would need for this kind of career. What about, are there any skills that postdocs and graduate students can develop now for this career? Maybe a related question is, if you're a postdoc or graduate student who hasn't written a grant, can you still get into this field?
Yeah, I mean, these two can answer this like better than I, but the one thing I would do if I were, and I would do this no matter if you want to come work with us or you want to be an academic or whatever you want to do, as long as it's science related, I would get on a grant writing team. And I don't know too many PIs that would say no to, hey, you come to them and say, I want to help on the next grant, make me a key part of this delivery, and just build your track record of understanding how and why grants are written, and why you select this one versus not that one. And I think that's probably from my perspective, if we're looking at CVs and we see 10 of them lined up and 2 of them have a track record of being involved or maybe even a catalyst for getting a grant, 2 out of those 10 every single time. So that's the one thing I would recommend doing, is just get on a grant writing team or suggest one yourself and lead that whole effort. Not for nothing, but that's how PIs become PIs. And that's how, you know, great grant writers become CEOs of companies. So that would be my 2 cents.
Eva, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think writing skills are very important, and probably, you know, really more and more you see scientists getting through and getting their PhD and postdoc and not being able to write, which to me is a shock. When I went to Caltech, we had to write 5 original research proposals. I mean, that was just part of getting your PhD, and to me that was very, very you know, important as far as my development, my ability to think about science. So as you're reading, if you're just sitting there reading literature, think about, well, how would I write this up? What would I do next, you know, in terms of developing this into a project? I mean, I think just keeping yourself sharp is very important. Thinking about science development and how to position that in a way that other people can appreciate what you're trying to say. And I think that just so many times I work with academics who are trying to start a company, and I'm amazed they've gotten any grants. They're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. But I look at the writing and I can't understand what they're talking about with the writing. And so what we do a lot is just taking that and repositioning it in a way that's very clear, concise, that anybody in field or out of field can better understand it. So write as much as you can. You know, really kind of be cognizant of what you're doing. When my little secret when I look at CVs is I go back to their graduate thesis and I just get it off the internet and I see if it's well written. So that's one thing that I do, because I think it's very important to be able to express yourself. And I don't read past the introduction, because to me that tells me if you can explain a problem, explain how you've created the solution and what the results are. So I do that, and then I also do require a writing sample, about a page and a half on a specific topic. So it's really the ability to express thoughts on paper that's absolutely critical. You can't go into grant writing unless you can do that. And then beyond that, there's a lot of other peripheral skills that are great, you know, that are nice to have. But that's sort of your fundamental thing. You've got to be able to write.
Thank you.
Yeah, you would never hire me. My terrible. You know, as far as things you can do now to start taking a look at this, I would definitely start checking the local kind of calendars of some of the organizations that are around town, like the Biotech Center. The SBTDC is a good group that does grant writing workshops here and there. Some of those things would just be, you know, forums like this where, you know, you wouldn't necessarily need to engage or get, you know, deep into a discussion with anyone, but you can certainly take a look at what people are doing and what kind of questions people have. You know, reading up online, you know, about the SBIR programs and the various programs that are out there. It's really nice to talk to people who know the answer to, you know, arcane questions about grants. So just knowing that stuff. The SF 424 is a 700-page, you know, grant Bible, but it's all in there. You know what I mean? So, as far as traits, I totally agree with Eva on writing. If you don't really enjoy writing and you don't enjoy communicating science, you know, it's going to be trickier. For sure. I would also recommend reading as much as possible and reading as little science as possible. So you write like a normal person. I double majored in college in English, but I think it helped my writing a little bit. I still don't use commas or semicolons properly, but I think good writers are also great readers, and I think that helps a lot. As far as, you know, traits that will help you in grant writing, I think there's a sense of sort of selflessness that you need to adopt. The science that you're writing isn't yours anymore. It's somebody else's. You're ghost writing for someone else. You don't own it. You're trying to capture their vision, if I can use a horrible phrase. You know, you're trying to make an argument about somebody else's idea, right? And your name's not going to be on it. And that's kind of a tough one, I think, for some folks who are, you know, in grad school and postdoc, we work for attribution. We're sure as hell aren't working for money. And so, you know, getting our name on the paper is what matters, you know. And so, sort of changing gears a little bit on that mindset, I think, is really important. And then, you know, there's a sense of responsibility about, you know, I think as Sam said, you know, having that creative and strategic outlook. When you're writing a grant, you're really setting the research direction for your company for the next 5 years, right? That money's going to hit in a year. You know, Lord willing, you get extra phases to that funding and you're out 3 years. So you really are setting a strategic direction for the company, whether your CEO, your client, whoever knows it. You're going to be, if you win that grant, you're going to be stuck with that project potentially for 3-4 years. So it better be good. It better be as good an idea at the time you submit as it is when it's funded. You don't want it to be a worse idea when the money hits. So, so yes, you know, a lot of creativity, a lot of writing, a lot of, you know, selflessness is maybe not the right word, but something along those lines. Recognizing that it's not about attribution anymore.
And one question that always gets submitted is how satisfying do you consider this career as opposed to the traditional academic route? Anybody, Nick, you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I left academics to do this, so I love it. I mean, I just think it's so cool. I worked with, you know, 40 or 50 different companies across the United States. I think that, you know, I've had 0% turnover. Maybe that's because, you know, when with my company, we work with a number of different projects, and so, you know, even if you have, you know, a technology that maybe, I don't think any technology is boring, but maybe you've just been kind of in it a little too long and you're getting tired of it, then you know, move over and you work on another project. I mean, gosh, we've had the types of projects. I guess I'm the type of person, I didn't, for grad school, it wasn't, and being a postdoc, what I didn't like about it was being so single-minded on a single project. I mean, I love going to seminars and learning about all this other cool stuff that was going on, you know, but I was stuck, you know, spending 99% of my time on a single project. So that's what I love about this career, is the ability to get out and work with Epicenter on their really cool technology, and then go work with another company on their technology, and, you know, fly to California to go to an NIH conference and, you know, learn about 30, 40, you know, 50 more different technologies, and then seeing them from conception all the way to commercialization. And you see, you know, I've got some companies with drugs in phase 3. They're going to be on the market. They're in the news. I've had 2 companies have an IPO. And I hear about them on the news, and I'm thinking, I wrote a grant for them. How cool, you know? So, you know, it's to me, it's incredibly satisfying. But for me, I'm like that. I like to think about a lot of different things, and you know, and so to me, academics was stifling because you know, being stuck in something so narrow, especially if you're in a field like I was, physical chemistry, where, you know, it's going to take you 8 years to build your equipment. You're not going to be doing 25 different projects, and this is kind of my, you know, chance to be able to get out there and do a lot of different things.
Totally agree on the big learning curves. That is the best part of the job. The other part is, I mean, I like to compete, right? And so it's competitive, and submitting a grant is an arrogant act because it says, you know, our idea is better than 85% of the grants out there in the world. You know, I love that part of it, and, you know, I need a career where I can celebrate epochs of success on a relatively steady basis, right? I want big, amazing news quarterly, right? And I need those moments, right? I need elation every once in a while. And so, you know, when you get a grant score of, you know, 18 or whatever, and bang, that company just got their first 225,000. I mean, it's such a cool inflection point for that group, right? It really is goosebumps. So.
Sam, any thoughts? Or?
Yeah, I don't really know the academic world, so I'm the wrong person to really answer that question.
Compared to GE.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would just say this. You know, so GE is actually a pretty good example, and if you look at this world we live in and the economy that drives it, you know, the Fortune 500, you know, employs something like 75% of. Actually, it drives about 75% of the current large, you know, established first world economy, and their employment base in that population of companies has actually gone down, and the real growth in this country and in many first world countries is driven by entrepreneurial companies, right? So here you've got the United States of America spends $29 billion a year on research via the NIH. Most of that goes to the academic arena. Incredible leadership, thought leadership in the sciences. Someone has been asking for the last 15, 25 years, okay, how do we translate that $29 billion a year into commercialized growth and driving economic impact, you know, continuing to maintain leadership? And the SBIR program is one of those levers. And so really, in an academic setting, it's a vehicle for turning, you know, ideas and core basic research into a product and a company. And that's what drives growth in this country and in many places. And that's what creates jobs. That's why, it's the only reason why, at least America has been in its, you can argue, are we leading the economic world or not, but you can't argue we haven't grown. And that growth comes from early stage companies and medium-sized based companies. And that comes from entrepreneurs. And the money, to some great extent, has come from SBIR and venture too. But I think so. What this platform of, I call it a company catalyst or a grant writer, that role is, I think of that as one and the same. You have an impact to grow this economy, to turn academic research into a product. And I'm sitting in a company, that's part of the point, and that's the whole point for our company. So it gives you a platform to do many things that impact society in a majorly favorable way.
Excellent, thank you. And you brought up economic growth, and postdocs and graduate students also wonder a lot about their personal economic growth. Can you talk a little bit about what the beginning salary would be in this field for a beginner, for a more advanced person?
Yeah, well, so I started as a junior woodchuck grant writer right out of postdoc. It was kind of lowish guy on the totem pole at my first startup. And my salary there was, I think, $40,000. So what I would suggest is if you take a full-time position as a grant writer with a small company, whatever kind of, don't necessarily worry about, once again, the training that you will receive in that position is invaluable, right? For me, my career has always been about trajectory, not where I am today, right? It's about where can I get in 10 years and what can I learn today to get me somewhere new in 5–10 years. So I made pretty much the same salary I was making as a postdoc when I transferred to becoming a grant writer. But I made sure to negotiate that if we won grants, I'm going to get a little bonus from each one of those. There's on the SBIRs, there's 7% of the grant budget is called a fee, right? So it's a little profit margin for the company to take 7% of that budget and do whatever they want with it. There's no reason you as the grant writer should not get some chunk of that fee, right? I think there are laws against writing grants on commission, but I'm not totally familiar with what they are. There aren't? Okay.
Not really.
All right, well, I know how to use contracts. So, whenever you want to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think you'll make a ton of money right out of the gate, but there's no reason that you can't do just as well as you're doing now. On the contract stuff, I mean, doing this as a side job, figure out how many hours it's going to take for you to write one of these things and, multiply it by whatever dollar amount you think is your hourly rate, and charge people that. And I don't know, I think I'm pretty good and relatively cheap. I mean, I got into this contract grant writing thing because I got laid off a year ago after our acquisition, so I need to find a job. So I'm trying to meet as many people as possible. So the money's not really part of it for me. It's about meeting people and trying to find the right fit for me in the next stage of my career. So, but yeah, figure out your billable rate. You know what I mean, and multiply it by the number of hours you think it'll take you to write 6–12 pages. Whichever kind of grant you're writing, and whatever. Be comfortable with. There's no need to be aggressive with this if you're looking at it as an opportunity to transition into a new career path.
I was just, yeah, go ahead.
As a grant writer, how much influence do you have on what you propose? Is it mainly like something given by the company that proposes the project, or do you have also influence on what's proposed?
Plenty of give and take on that. I mean, we did a grant last cycle that I told Sam was not a good idea, right? And we did it anyway, right? So I had no influence on that one. But there are some, because once again, it's not mine, right? It's a strategic direction for the company. They need the money. They've set that, so we're going to write it. On some of them, though, I mean, Sam's been awesome where I've brought him, we've had a collaborator who had something interesting, and I said, this is a direct to phase 2, right? Let's write a monster on this. And he said, you bet, right? So it's all over the map. It depends on how cool your CEO client is.
Let me go back to the salary question, because
Yeah,
I've got maybe a different perspective on this. There was a report that came out listing the top 10 careers. I don't know if anybody saw it. That's one you circulated, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, and grant writing can range anywhere from a starting of 30, 40, but it can go up to 300 easily if you know what you're doing, if you're really bright. So I think that for me, I think I'm pretty selective on the type of person who I look for, but we start at 35 an hour, which is a 70K. Translates to 70K. So I think that it's something that if you're like any career, if you're really good, if you're top in your field, there's money to be made.
So kind of tying into what we've been talking about recently, how is your performance evaluated within the company, particularly in light of the fact that 85 to 90% of grants aren't going to get funded, no matter how great they are or not?
Well, we expect to have a much higher rate than that. I mean, our expectation is 50%. So, and I've done this long enough that I can evaluate based on looking at how somebody's written. I mean, I have a great team. What I do, which I think is the right thing to do, is at the front end, just do a really careful job to make sure you're bringing the right person on board. I think that's really important. So, very selective, probably go through 100 CVs before, I find the right one. So you're evaluated based on getting the grant. You're also evaluated based on your ability to work with the company and the team. And so that's very important. It is important to have, a personality that is, such that you can be a team player, because you are part of a team when you're writing a grant. There's no other way around it. There's a lot of people involved, and so that's important. And then something else that I touched on, of course, is timelines, being able to meet deadlines, communication skills. So all those are very important, and those are things that I look at.
Yeah, I would really echo that. Getting the award is really the only currency of evaluation. And like you either know or you've heard, it takes some time before that happens. And I think that I think what we look for is attitude and perseverance. And everyone in this room is, I think, smart enough. But if you have those character traits that make it fun to work with, and you have the aptitude for keeping your shoulder to that grindstone, and you do a good job. I mean, we've had grant writers that are trained at some of the best schools in this country, and they're just missing some of the fundamental taxonomy of DNA, RNA, protein generating. I mean, you would think that's odd, but the act of what Eva was saying, specifically putting pen to paper and making that sound compelling, and just being able to articulate that in writing is a skill and an art. And so we're not going to be able to tell in 3 months if the grant has been awarded, but we can tell, did you work effectively at pursuing it, and is it a solid grant?
So I want to agree about halfway, right? One, it is cool as a grant writer, you have batting average, right? And you can report that to any future employer, any future client, and tell them what your batting average is and how it's better than national average. And you can, my CV can be 2 lines, right? I had a job where we raised $9 million, and I had a job where we raised $5 million. That's all I need to show anybody, right, to get their attention. All that aside, right? Yes, sure, those are great successes and should be highlighted. But you're going to write grants potentially. Once again, if you don't have full autonomous control over the grant pipeline, which there's very little chance you will. Very little chance any of us do, really. I mean, this is a community act, right? I mean, a camel is a horse designed by committee, right? So you're going to end up with these grants that you don't necessarily think are a great fit. So your job is to do the best job possible to turn it into a great sounding, appearing grant. I mean, I've written grants on targeted delivery of minoxidil to the scalp, right? That's a terrible grant. But when I sent it to the VP of R&D, he looked at it and said, "This looks like a grant. This looks like a piece of science." I consider that one of my great successes. Never got funded, had no chance, right? But we took whatever the company's strategic initiative was, and we turned it into a research plan that made sense and was cogent and was workable. To Eva's point, this job you spend a lot of time by yourself, right? And so your self-confidence is hugely important, right? So I always go back to why I got from a fantastic neurologist here to convince yourself first. if you're convinced that it's a good grant and it's a good proposal, and you as if you in your reviewer mindset would read that grant and say, this is a good plan, this is well supported, that matters more than anything. And that you can defend why you believe that's the case. If somebody wants to come to you and say, well, your batting average isn't very high, you could say, these are the grants we wrote, I believe these are strong for the following reasons, right? I think a degree of self-confidence about these things is very important. But, and again, if you're not convinced, you know, do better and convince yourself to write a better grant.
Yes.
You mentioned 1 out of 100, get to the top of your pile. So what are you particularly looking for in that CV that stands out as worth the call?
You know, to me, CVs look a lot alike. I look at the cover letter, so to be honest. So that's where I start. I read the cover letter, and that's what convinces me to take that next step. I look for passion, I look for excitement, I look for writing ability. In the cover letter, if there's grammar error, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's probably what honestly, I guess the first layer is passion. I want somebody really excited about being in this field. I'm excited about it, and that's kind of the culture that I have about, you know, within the company. And, you know, I do get a lot of CVs that, you know, I think like we discussed earlier, sort of, you can tell that grant writing was a fallback. Oh, well, I was, you know, applying for academics, didn't get anything. Can I get a job as a grant writer at your company? No. I mean, that's not, it's not, to me, it's not a fallback career. And I call it grant specialist to get a little bit past that grant writing perspective. But because I think it's a really exciting field. And so I think somebody who shares that same passion probably is 1 in 100. But when you find that person, it's great. It's really cool.
I think teaching experience is a really cool thing on a grant writer CV as well, because I think there's a heavy act of teaching in 6 pages. You know what I mean? You're trying to get somebody up to speed on something that they may have never seen before, and you really are, you know, at least for a paragraph or 2, teaching people, you know, why this is important and why it's interesting and why your plan makes sense. So I do like teaching experience in a grant writer.
So if you're the 1 in 100, you get the chance, things are working out, going well. Both Eva and Nick, you guys don't have MBAs, and you have made this transition pretty completely. What are the long-term job prospects for somebody that makes a switch like this? Does that degree ever become necessary for advance? I guess at this point, spent so much time in school, I feel like if you're going to make a career change, you want to make it with the certainty that you don't have to go back again.
I mean, Sam's going to maybe have a different perspective with an MBA.
Can we?
I'm going to leave now. You guys can finish the
I mean, there's plenty of CEOs with no MBA. I was VP of R&D with no MBA. I think you bring a certain specialty to the field, and when you're sitting there in the boardroom, you're adding your perspective. And if your perspective is the ability to basically understand how science fits in with the role of the business, that's a huge value add. And if you really want to be an MBA, and that's, you're really more interested in kind of the business side first and then the science, then I guess maybe that's where an MBA would be useful. But I don't see any career limitation based on having a PhD. I think it's a really good thing.
Also, I think an MBA is also, it's a terminal degree, right? Just like a PhD. So in my view, my PhD is my terminal degree, and I'm maxed out. You know what I mean? So me getting an MBA doesn't change the fact that I have that terminal degree, right? If I was, I have friends who are like engineers and things like that, and they're 10 years into their career and need that terminal degree for advancement because of their company structure, or just to have that postgraduate degree. I think that's an effective means. That kind of school is an effective means to get there. On other career trajectories off of grant writing, I don't think there's much limit, right? Because there's going to be a regulatory element to the grant. There's going to be a business development. There's going to be marketing. There's going to be product development. It's the entire company really needs to be boiled into that grant, right? They're not just funding an idea. They're funding your company to execute a plan, right? So you need to provide a comprehensive view of the entire company. So whatever chunk of that you want to kind of latch onto and make your career for the next 20 years, I think it's a nice preview of what those kinds of things look like.
Yeah, just maybe the thought from the lowly MBA on the panel. I would say you don't really need an MBA, provided you have a headset for growing a business. I think MBAs are great for understanding the capital asset pricing model, figuring out which discount rate to do. You know, there's a lot of organizational dynamics that are useful to find. You know, managerial accounting, which is, if anyone tells you that's a science, they're wrong, it's an art form. A lot of those things happen at bigger companies. You know, if you're doing capital asset pricing model in an entrepreneurial company, you should be out the door and never come back. And I think ultimately the MBA it's an experiential degree. I mean, you're certainly going to learn debits and credits, but you know, it's not something that you're learning necessarily a body of knowledge and then you go apply that in a company environment. And I've seen plenty of PhDs that can navigate that smartly, and you don't necessarily need an MBA. It gives you maybe a more well-rounded perspective. It's a little. I think about it like the airline pilot analogy, where airline pilots are paid a lot of money, and they, by and large, are pushing buttons until the lightning strike on one of the engines, and that's when the airline pilot is worthwhile. It's when things are going sideways, the plane is going down. You know, and that specialized knowledge is necessary when it's necessary, and you'd pay a lot of money for that, so the plane doesn't go down. In terms, and so, you know, but if you can surround yourself with other people there, then you're good. In terms of career stability, durability, I think individuals that are the catalysts to bring in money into a company, no matter the size, are incredibly valuable. And if you're doing your job right and you're fun to work with and you're contributing in a selfless way, you're putting a company first, I don't see why anyone would get rid of you. It's just not a good idea. And so generally people are not going to do that. So I think it's, you know, and like what Eva has done, I think, you know, she's, and Nick for that matter as well. I mean, they wrote grants, were successful doing it, and now they're more conducting that orchestra than playing in the first chair. And they can eminently sit in that first chair, but you know, as a conductor, that's maybe the next step. And, you know, I'll say this, you know, Nick has been, and Eva, both have been tremendously successful. You know, I think Nick is on a CEO track, and you know, I think he's built enough excellent credibility in the space, in the field, and in the community from a relationship standpoint that if he's not a CEO in 3 to 5 years, I think something's I'm probably not doing my job right, quite frankly. And so I think it is eminently a leadership path, and maybe a leadership CEO or VP of R&D. You know, there's plenty of places to go when you're bringing it down.
Sam's also a really good recruiter.
That's right.
And even just skip CEO and run straight to president, I think. Right?
Chairman, chairwoman.
Shraddha?
So, talking about grant writing, the question I had was, do you write individually or do you write in team? To elaborate, what I'm trying to ask is, there was a time when NIH used to ask for 25 pages of grant, and then it moved to 6 pages, and lots of people couldn't, even though they were good grant writers, couldn't turn from words to, say, for example, flowchart. So, in your team, is there a possibility that somebody who may not be, you know, very good with words, but very good with presentation, for example? So, is that how you guys work with team, or is it just you individually?
I would say you got to write. You got to know how to write. If you're good at flowcharts, then you know. That's
it was just
useful.
an example.
Yeah, no,
I
don't know. My 2 cents is, you know, you have to be able to do it all, and there are members of the team, but if you don't know what you're doing in all aspects, then you don't know what you're doing. So.
I'm a big fan of, I think it's a really good point, right? When we went to 25 to 6, the grants had to get a lot more visual, right? And because you didn't have 6 paragraphs to describe things, so you needed to start, you know, cartoons went just bananas, right? Everybody had a cartoon now, right? Because you had to get more information per page. I think there should be, on every grant, there should be a picture, a figure, a table on every page, right? Just to give your reviewer a break. They're going to read this thing on the plane, heading to the study section. They're not going to be in a high back chair reviewing it word for word. So I'm a big fan of visuals. I think that's a really important part of it. But you know, as Sam said, as a grant writer, identifying the chunks that lend themselves to a visual or a table or whatever, and then building it effectively, I think it's all part of that package.
I know it's not your field, but I'm wondering if you know if there are any grant writing positions for your PhD in humanities. I think most people here maybe are from STEM, but I wonder if there are also humanities track jobs.
Yeah, I mean, so pretty much every cabinet level position in the government has a small business grant program, or other grant programs. So, there's a lot of education grants out there. There are a lot of other agencies, you know what I mean, that are funding those things. Typically, NIH is my favorite SBIR program just because it's monstrous and the percentages of hit rates are quite good. And I just have it I have a system, you know what I mean, that I don't have to diverge from too far. But yeah, there's lots of other grant programs in lots of other disciplines. It's an issue of finding the right potential, commercialization partner who's a small business who is developing educational tools or whatever else. So that's maybe the trickier bit, especially around here. It's not maybe necessarily, you know what I mean, biotech and life sciences and IT and those kinds of places are a little more prominent than, than some of those other kind of companies. But for sure, lots of grant programs out there in other areas that are not technology.
Yeah, were you asking about a humanities PhD applied to a life sciences grant application focus, or
No,
grants for humanities specifically?
I think more, both, I guess, but I don't think I can apply for life and science, grant writing position because I don't have the skills to explain those technologies, I guess, well enough.
I mean, I think, so Ron Pressman would be my poster child. So Ron Pressman was a English major undergrad. He went to work on Wall Street, and now he runs one of the biggest reinsurance companies. It's not a life science example, but my point is, insurance and reinsurance is incredibly analytical and mathematically based application, and he's an English major, and if anyone's an English major, like Nick, you know it's very analytical, right? So I think it can be done, but it's a pretty big, to apply that into the STEM field, there's a lot of fundamentals that may or may not be feasible.
It depends on where you are in those fundamentals. I mean, I definitely have seen people who are, I'm a scientist who writes grants, right? But I've also seen people who are writers who write grants, right? And can get up to speed on the science. I'm a B+ student, right? That's my, right? I want to get to B+ smart on the topics that I write because it's not worth the extra hours to get to A+ smart, right? In my view, this is just me, as I say this to my client.
He's right.
I want to be efficient, right? So if you can, depending on where your science chops are, if you can get to B+ smart on specific technologies and you're a badass writer, then yeah, maybe, you know what I mean, it can work. There are definitely people who do that, who transition from a writer to a grant writer as opposed to a scientist to a grant writer.
We have time for one last question. You haven't asked one yet.
The question is somewhat similar in that I think being a scientist, I feel like I have very little knowledge of how companies work. And so how did you gain the experience that you need to be able to translate that to being able to write grants about how everything fits into the company? I don't know if obviously you didn't get an MBA, so it wasn't specialized training, and you probably learned it on your own, but I don't know if there are any kind of mechanisms or ways that you did that other than just reading in your free time and trying to figure it out. Good question.
Well, in the types of grants that we write, I'd say a good part of them don't require a lot of the business side. You need to prove that it's got a commercializable potential, which can be as easy as saying this is a $2 billion market, then boom, go back into the science. But you do get to what are called the phase 2 SBIR grants where you require to write a commercialization plan. I think that that's something that you can learn on the job. It's something that's very important to have input from the company itself, from the business people on that. So I think that is an aspect that really can be learned as you move forward, as long as you've got sort of a good instinct for it, and if you are the type of person who can learn quickly, that's going to really be to your advantage.
Yeah, I mean, one approach just tactically would be to get close to a company that has had some success on getting grants and read their grant applications, right? Because then you can see, especially if they have one that they wrote the grant application and now the product is in the marketplace. And if they develop that product smartly, they're going to have a features and benefits set, a differentiation of that product as it's sold into the marketplace that actually works. Right? Customers are buying it because of those differentiating effects. If you can see that in the marketplace and read the grant application, you can get a solid feel for what was written and then what is, which most of the time is somewhat related but different. And so I would recommend that. And we're one of those companies. If anyone here is interested, we're hiring right now for our September cycle. So there's plenty of time between now and then to help write a grant. Part of that effort would be getting up to speed. If you've never seen a product be developed or get into the marketplace, reading some of our phase 1 and phase 2 applications, and understanding just that end product of what success should look like, and then I think that's part of the reason that the company is there, is to help chart that course. The product's going to need to do X, Y, Z. Here's the spec, and the actual development of it has to equal that result.
Is that information publicly available? Can you go to grants.gov and look up SBIR grants?
You get the abstract and the title. So yeah. So we'll ask you to sign a confidentiality, and we'll ask you to abide by that.
You can actually, there's some full grants that have been published. I think it's through NIAID. So I'd take a look at that NIAID, NIH website, and they should have some full grants that were funded, and they publish the whole thing start to finish. So you can get, SBIR is the type of grant. So you can get a sense of the types of grants that are written for small businesses.
And you pick up the business stuff bit by bit. It's just time. It's just time and paying attention and diffusion. You know what I mean? If you're around it for a long time, this is whatever, 8 years in, 9 years in for me, right? So I know probably a third of what I need to know at this point. You know what I mean? You're just around it and you soak it up, as you go, and having the confidence to get what you soaked up and put it into a grant with some conviction that sounds like a business plan.
All right. Well, let's thank our panelists for coming. I'm guessing some of you may want to speak to